Now let's get started. My name is Ryan Powell. I'm the Senior Director of Demand Gen at CyCognito, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Sam Sexton, who's a consultant, and Jess Byrne, who's a Senior Analyst from Forrester. Thank you for joining us today, Sam and Jess. We look forward to your discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks for having us.
Of course.
So with those introductions out of the way, I thought we would just quickly go over kind of the agenda for this presentation. We'll be going over the results of the study, but if you haven't already, I highly recommend visiting CyCognito's landing page and reading the study for yourself to get a full picture of our findings. Before we kind of break down the methodology that we used to create this study, I'm gonna pass things off to Jess, and she'll kind of walk us through the state of the attack surface management space.
Great. Thank you so much, Sam. So hi, everybody. Jess Byrne, Senior Analyst on the Security and Risk Research team. I'm happy to be here today to talk to you about the current market for attack surface management. And, you know, to kick this off, I think to set the stage, really, I think many organizations got themselves into a bit of a sprawl situation starting in around 2020 with accelerated migration to cloud environments. And many of these folks did not stop and clean up and consolidate after the move because the pace of the business didn't let them. Business definitely did not let up in 2021 and even in 2022 until now. So this was also happening for their supply chain partners. You know, they were doing the same thing, and they were connecting to your own company, your own organization with the same sprawl on their end. So this is all happening. And then on top of that is the increase in shadow IT. And again, all connected. Everyone's moving fast. They're not taking the time to bring in security or other folks in IT to assess the solutions like SaaS solutions and other applications. So they just sign the check and go. And data is flowing through those applications and through things that are purchased through shadow IT means. You know, it's flowing through partner and supply chain applications, and it's flowing through cloud infrastructure. And all of this may be unknown to security and to IT. And you can't secure what you can't see. So it's very important that these organizations get a handle on their asset estate and remediate exposures of all types to reduce their attack surface. And then to move forward and hit on that point about securing what you can't secure what you can't see. I wanted to highlight some fresh data from our 2022 Business Technographic Security Survey that shows that vulnerabilities and exploits in either your software or the software supply chain of your vendors and partners is extremely vulnerable, right? They're right at the top of the list for our respondents as to how an external attack they experienced was carried out. So it's important to understand your IT asset estate and the exposures that you may have. And to do that, you'll need better and continual visibility. And so for more information on that, Sam, I'm going to turn it over to you to now dig into the study.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that background, Jess. As we'll see shortly, many of those concerns that were cited in the survey came up again when we were talking to customers. So to determine how CyCognito helps customers with these challenges, CyCognito commissioned us at Forrester to conduct a total economic impact, or TEI, case study. TEI is built on a consistent, repeatable methodology where through research and customer interviews, we determine qualitative and quantitative benefits, costs, and the flexibility factor of any given investment, and then filter these metrics through implementation and engagement risk. So we start by performing our own internal due diligence. Then we reach out to customers to hear their candid experiences with the solution, in this case, CyCognito. We then take the customer's information and amalgamate and anonymize it by creating what is known as a composite organization, which is basically a blended organization that shares traits from all of the customers that we spoke with. We then use that organization as the baseline for the financial model, and the financial model in turn serves as a baseline to write the case study around. So a few disclosures now that we've covered our methodology. As I said before, this presentation is based on a case study that was commissioned by CyCognito. Our findings do not constitute an endorsement, nor should they be taken as an assumption of guaranteed ROI for any organization that makes this investment. This is basically a look at the experiences of 4 customers of CyCognito. So I really strongly recommend looking at your own situation making your own estimates within the framework we provide to determine if an investment is appropriate. So with all that out of the way, here's an overview of the 4 interviewees that we spoke to. And as you can see, there was a lot of variance between each of the interviewees, a lot of different industries, a lot of different types of industries, and even in size, there was a lot of variation. The smallest organization was a physical security company that boasted $250 million in annual revenue, and the largest was the energy organization, which had a revenue in the hundreds of billions. They also had varying numbers of total assets and active assets. But despite all of these pretty substantial differences, they had a lot in common. And a lot of what they had in common was already kind of outlined by Jess in her overview of the space. Most folks were dealing with either a bare bones attack surface management solution or just didn't have one. Because like Jess said, with 2020, with like the rapid move to cloud and everything, they were just kind of growing too fast. And as a result, shadow IT was also growing really, really quickly, far quicker than these organizations could really deal with. They were struggling with low visibility into their external attack surfaces and into their own shadow IT. And dealing with these threats either was impossible or required a level of manual effort that just was not sustainable over a long period of time. They also had to deal with a high number of false positives because often the solutions and procedures that they already had in place didn't have the precision or insight to actually correctly identify, oh, this is a big problem that you need to deal with now versus, oh, this is an asset that just has a similar name to one of your assets. You don't need to worry about it. So their main goals were to solve these 3 problems, were to improve the visibility into their attack surfaces, to reduce the amount of manual labor required, and to reduce the rate of false positives. And CyCognito was able to assure the 4 customers that yes, they could help with all of these issues by providing visibility, by saving time and tracking down, contextualizing and remediating issues, and reducing false positive asset alerts. So based on what we heard from the interviewees, we constructed this composite organization to serve as the baseline for the case study. The composite organization here has an annual revenue of $25 billion. It is a large enterprise level organization. We have 45,000 total employees, 250,000 total assets, although before investing in CyCognito, the composite only knows about half of those assets, or 125,000 of them. Of the 250,000 assets, 70,000 of them are active. And by the 3rd year of the CyCognito investment, the organization is undergoing 6 mergers, acquisitions, or divestments per year to reflect the circumstances of the interviewees that we spoke with. So the high-level results for the composite organization, a return on investment of 490%, $15.8 million in risk-adjusted benefits over the course of the 3 years, and a risk-adjusted 3-year NPV or net present value of $13.2 million. We're confident these numbers reflect the combined experience of the interviewees we spoke to. For example, we have this quote from the CISO of the gaming organization. CyCognito gives me the ability to manage my attack surface within the set of people I already have. It's given us something we never had the ability to do before, which that's obviously quite a positive statement and also speaks to the kind of numbers that we're seeing here. Is the folks that we spoke with were able to, for the first time, manage their attack surface without having to expand to new resources, which obviously is a pretty big deal. So from here, we're going to do a deep dive into all of the 3-year risk-adjusted benefits that we were able to quantify for the composite organization. So that's kind of key, the quantify factor there, because this doesn't represent all of the benefits that organizations can and did experience with CyCognito. We will be going into qualitative or unquantified benefits once we finished our deep dive. And you can see that the main benefits we have are savings on mergers, acquisitions, and divestiture, labor savings on better discovery, labor savings for contextualization, license savings on security testing, labor savings on handling false positives, faster incident remediation, better protection against security exploits, and savings on cybersecurity insurance. So the first benefit that I'd like to talk about is the avoided labor and firm costs for mergers, acquisitions, and divestiture. As you can see from the quote from the consumer goods CISO here, which I will just read, CyCognito has definitely made us more flexible on the acquisition side. We literally don't have to do anything. We just tell them, yes, add those new entities to our tenants. And now they're in the same workflow processes that we had already established. There's zero friction. So CyCognito was able to significantly streamline the process of attack surface auditing for potential acquisitions and then kind of bringing them into the organization proper and aligning them security-wise with everything else. This also goes for divestments. The gaming CISO's organization was going through a period of divestiture when we spoke to them. And basically they described how before CyCognito, a significant amount of security engineer and legal FTE time was required to make sure that things went smoothly and safely with divesting, as well as requiring the costly assistance of a legal firm per each divestment. So that's like hundreds of thousands of dollars per divestment to make sure that everything is going smoothly and that everything is looked after and protected. However, with CyCognito, the time and firm investment from a security standpoint is practically eliminated. Interviewees were simply able to let CyCognito know what was being added and what was being removed, and then they could just move forward with confidence. So for the composite organization, these risk-adjusted savings total to $4.4 million over the course of the 3 years of the study. So our next benefit is the 60% time savings on discovery. So one of the biggest common problems that we saw among interviewees was a lack of visibility. So with that in mind, it's no surprise that several of them were intrigued by CyCognito's ability to discover assets. We have this quote from the director of security and compliance for the physical security firm here. CyCognito was the only platform that gave me a full inventory of all the subsidiaries that I have. During the proof of concept, they were able to find a certain company, which was an acquisition that happened just 2 months prior that not even my CIO knew about. So what that interviewee is describing was they went through a proof of concept phase where they were talking to several potential attack surface management folks. And CyCognito was the only one that was able to give a full inventory of everything that their organization already had, and even find things that they didn't know that they had yet because of miscommunications or kind of getting lost in translation between departments at the organization. So that quote really speaks to how difficult that knowledge can be to come by, that even the CISO of your own company isn't necessarily going to have all of this information, whereas CyCognito is able to find it very, very quickly. This goes for the other interviewees as well. All of the interviewees that we spoke to that were using CyCognito's discovery tools were impressed by them and described similar massive findings of both known and unknown assets during the proof of concept phase or immediately upon closing with CyCognito. So it's for this reason that, as we'll see later when we're looking at costs, that the composite organization initially only lists 125,000 assets for billing purposes. That's typically about how large the gap was between known and unknown assets for the organizations that we spoke to. It was usually the amount of assets that you actually have is around double what you think you have. So for the composite organization, CyCognito's discovery tools save about 60% of the time required if organizations were to manually hunt down and find all of these unknown assets, which would obviously be an extremely time-consuming and costly endeavor. And this has a risk-adjusted 3-year impact of $1.5 million for the composite organization. So moving into contextualization, one of the more surprising findings that I found from the interviews in writing the study was the value that organizations placed on contextualizing. This was actually the most important thing for a lot of folks that we spoke to, because finding the total number of assets is really vital for visibility. It helps define what your attack surface is, but it's not enough on its own, right? It can also introduce a lot of headaches without necessarily improving your security. We have this quote from the digital security principle for the energy organization that I think really gets at the heart of why contextualization is so valuable. Getting the so what, the potential impact of an asset, that's where CyCognito really stands on its own as a product. Because just seeing, okay, great, we have 125,000 assets we didn't know about, that's fine, but you really want to be able to go, okay, 30,000 of these we don't even need to worry about, they're fine. These we can just do a couple things and they're disconnected from us. These we need to bring in. You need that kind of level of detail, and getting that level of detail is often really, really complicated and really, really tricky for organizations. You basically have to go on a wild goose chase, both within your organization and outside the company, finding who owns an asset, finding external folks that might be associated with an asset, getting a hold of them, talking to them, figuring out from them what's going on. Because a lot of these things have probably been kind of abandoned or are like quite old. So even during stages of that process, you might find, oh, the person that was in charge of this quit. We need to find out who owns it now. And that just adds more time and more effort that you're spending, not necessarily securing your environment. So the 60% time savings for the composite organization is also applied to this fact-finding process as well as to the discovery. And because of how often higher level security figures were involved in this process, because usually you kind of need someone at the level of like a deputy CISO or higher to get involved and go, hey, I'm pulling rank. Tell me what the deal with this is. We don't have time to mess around with this. We calculate a higher $2.2 million risk-adjusted 3-year total as benefits for the composite organization. So the reduced licensing costs on security testing is another very interesting one for the interviewees, because what they told us about security testing before CyCognito was that they had trusted vendors and partners they would work with who would perform regular deep tests on their environment. So at regular intervals, they would take a small sampling of assets and test them really, really intensely and deeply, finding out everything that was going on with the assets and just kind of extrapolating that information out as kind of a substitute for the health of the whole organization. But many of the interviewees we spoke with felt that these tests just aren't broad enough to give a full idea of what's happening across the whole attack surface. Like we've just discussed, the attack surface is huge. You don't know what a lot of it is, and a lot of it is completely disconnected from each other. So you can't just sample a couple of random assets and kind of call it a day, right? So what happened with CyCognito is CyCognito provides testing that basically switches from testing one asset or a few assets in depth to testing nearly all of your assets shallowly, taking like a really quick look at everything and then flagging any assets that showed potential irregularities or problems that you need to dive into deeper. So you can see from this quote from the CISO of the Consumer Goods Organization, due to CyCognito, we've decreased our security testing license costs by 20 to 30%, that this doesn't completely eliminate spending on other licenses for security testing. What we found is that a lot of the organizations we spoke with still really, really liked and appreciated the ability to work with trusted vendors and other partners for that more in-depth focused level of testing. But what they were able to do was switch it from we're doing this regularly to we're doing this as needed. So CyCognito now handles the regular testing. And then if you decide you want another in-depth look or test, then you can go to your licensed partner and get it for just what you need, instead of just paying regularly when it's not actually helping you that much. So over the course of 3 years, we calculate that this enables savings of $145,000 risk adjusted for the composite organization. So as you all likely remember from earlier and from Jess's overview, false positives on attack surface threats was one of the biggest issues that people have flagged as being a struggle with managing their attack surface. Most of the interviewees that we spoke with found that CyCognito helped significantly with this. One example comes from the Director of Security and Compliance for the Physical Security Organization, quoted here. One of the things that we like about CyCognito is the low rate of false positives. They know that those are IoT devices, they do not belong to us, and basically they are not part of their asset list. So that interviewee was referencing a recurring issue that would happen where they have a lot of Internet of Things enabled devices that they don't own, but obviously would come up as belonging to their organization with like more of a rudimentary attack surface management scan. And that was a recurring issue that they had over and over and over again, where they had to sift through and go, no, this isn't actually connected to us. This doesn't impact our environment. It's fine. And CyCognito was the one that was eventually able to go, oh yeah, no, we're not going to bug you about that anymore. We have another really interesting story from the Consumer Goods Organization where their prior solution would frequently pick up a nearby college with a similar name to their company as a potentially unsecure subsidiary. And CyCognito was able to filter that out and prevent that from reoccurring as well. So our findings showed that CyCognito's filtration on issues like these saves the composite organization 15% time on handling false positives overall, which has a 3-year risk-adjusted impact of $767,000. Moving into time savings on remediation of incidents, interviewees also said that CyCognito helped with remediation in addition to eliminating false positives. So CyCognito provides a lot of really helpful remediation tools. It will give you step-by-step instructions on what you need to do for a lot of remediation issues and can just help you prioritize which ones need to get resolved first. But a lot of the time savings that we kind of ran into with interviewees on incident remediation was actually kind of indirect. Like the stuff that CyCognito was actively doing was definitely very helpful. But one of the big difference makers for a lot of the interviewees that we spoke with was that their time was down because CyCognito was just so much easier to use than prior solutions. We have this quote from the CISO of the Consumer Goods Organization. Definitely one of the biggest things we liked was the UI and how easy it was to use. We could see everything. So unlike with other solutions with CyCognito, the UI is very easy to use. You can see all of the different things that you're dealing with, and it's just that much easier to prioritize and like assign people to work on tasks. We also heard from several of the interviewees that CyCognito's ease of integration with other tools saved significant amount of times with remediation. It was a lot easier to loop in folks from other departments and create tickets internally because CyCognito just plays nice with the other systems that you have going on. So as with the false positives, we found that this saves about 15% of time on incident remediation, which in turn saves the composite organization a risk-adjusted total of $2.7 million over the course of 3 years. So in terms of direct threats to attack surfaces, what we found is that interviewees were most concerned about exploits like Log4j. And because of the potential catastrophic consequences of an exploit like that penetrating deep into the attack surface, this was not an area where interviewees were starting completely from zero. Most of the interviewees had already done their own checks and found significant percentages of their vulnerable assets to exploits like this. But what CyCognito really impressed folks with was the speed at which they were able to find not just all the pre-existing assets, but several additional assets that it was unknown that they were vulnerable as well, and then provide remediation and patching instructions to make sure those assets are all safe. You can see this with the quote from the Director of Security and Compliance for the Physical Security Organization. In less than 24 hours, I had a list of extended accessible assets patched to protect against Log4j. So what we found for the composite organization is that the composite already knows about 50% of their assets that are vulnerable to exploits, but CyCognito is able to find the other 50% and help get them patched immediately. So the improved security from having these assets identified and secured is worth $1.3 million risk adjusted over 3 years to the composite organization. So the final benefit to CyCognito we were able to quantify was around cybersecurity insurance, which I'm sure all of you are all too familiar with, is just getting more and more expensive just every year, especially with premiums. But what was interesting with CyCognito is that they're actually able to kind of help in negotiations with this. You can see this in the quote from the CISO of the gaming organization. I was able to sit on the call with the insurance brokers, go through our external threat surface on my computer dashboard, and show them how proactive we will be. Considering that some people have seen millions of dollars worth of increase in their cyber insurance premiums over the past couple of years because of ransomware, the ability to do that was fantastic for us. So basically, CyCognito is a really powerful tool to kind of have in your back pocket when you're negotiating your premiums for the new year to go, look, we're being responsible. We have this solution, and we're protecting against all kinds of things. We found like hundreds of new assets that we didn't already know about, and we've patched them. You should not be hiking our premiums this much. We're low risk. So that's really, really great. However, if reducing cybersecurity insurance premiums was possible solely through one investment, people probably wouldn't be as kind of worked up and annoyed by how expensive they are. So we have no doubt that every organization is bringing a multitude of different arguments to the table to show responsibility and to get those premiums as lowered, or at the very least avoid big increases as much as they can. So we credit CyCognito with 15% of avoided cybersecurity insurance premium increases, and that has a 3-year risk-adjusted savings of $2.9 million for the composite organization. So now that we've gone through the quantitative benefits, we have a few additional benefits we weren't able to fully quantify to discuss. So the first benefit is improved team morale. This goes hand in hand with a lot of the UI improvements we discussed, as well as the kind of increased peace of mind. Employees go from having to manage painful, unreliable integrations to like a more centralized dashboard. It's much easier to communicate with people, and the improved security and patching of exploits means there's fewer really late nights and weekends, and you just have that increased peace of mind. The next benefit, improved internal communication, kind of ties into this. Because CyCognito centralizes all of the information, it is much, much easier for you to loop in folks on what's going on. Everybody has access to the dashboard. They all have access to the same information. It just cuts down on miscommunication and misunderstanding and just kind of dead time bureaucratically. So it was much easier to disseminate information across the organization. So the final qualitative benefit we have is based on an anecdote from the CISO of the gaming organization, where they found that in sales and other contract negotiations, folks on the other side of them would go, okay, we think that you should cut us a big discount because we've looked at, we found a security scorecard type website that is showing what your, what your security grade is. And CyCognito was very helpful with allowing them to push back on that, because they were able to go, no, the program you're using, it doesn't have all the knowledge. It doesn't like know everything. We have much more detailed metrics and much more detailed information here to prove that we are actually more secure than that appears. So no, we're not going to cut you a discount because of that. So CyCognito can be very useful as a negotiating tool in that way. But as with the quantified insurance premium benefit, you're not just getting a discount only because of the one thing. Right? A sale is a lot more complicated than just one product. So CyCognito definitely helps, but it's not the end all be all there. So in addition to the benefits, the composite organization undergoes 3 quantified costs for the use of the CyCognito platform, which we have outlined here. The licensing fees, ongoing management, and that tiny, tiny little sliver you see at the bottom is the deployment costs. So let's break those down. So firstly, the composite organization pays an annual license fee in order to use the platform. This license fee is based on a myriad of factors that are broken out in more detail in the full study, but it basically includes the total asset count, how many assets are actually active, how regular security cadence you want with CyCognito, and a few other factors that if you're curious about, I highly recommend checking out the full study to get all the details on. In terms of ongoing management, the composite organization also requires a few FTEs to monitor the platform to make the best use of its insights. You're not going to get all of the useful things out of the dashboard unless you have people looking at the dashboard, right? So there's just time that's devoted to that. And while there are costs to deployment, what we found in speaking with interviewees is that deployment of CyCognito is incredibly fast and the costs are basically minuscule. It's minimal. You have a few administrative and developer FTEs getting the platform up and running over a few hours spread out over 1 month. So in addition to calculating benefits, costs, and risks, Forrester also looks at what we call flexibility, which is the ability to do something better, faster, or cheaper in the future because of a prior investment in the technology. So for CyCognito, the two main flexibility factors we found centered around integrating recent acquisitions and the ability to quickly determine assets that are unused or unnecessary. So the first part of that is the easier integration of acquired organizations. We already quantified the labor and license savings associated with the streamline of acquisitions, mergers, and divestiture. But there's kind of a factor beyond that, which is the strategic implications that that has. If before you assumed that your business acquiring another business meant like a years-long process of auditing and legal work and other things, but now it's much, much faster and easier, that obviously is going to have kind of far-reaching implications for how you do business and how you can plan around, should I focus on acquiring other subsidiaries or not, that we can't really quantify right now, but is definitely something to keep in mind. The other flexibility factor is kind of summed up in this quote from the Director of Security and Compliance for the Physical Security Organization, where we noticed that we had some domains we were paying hosting for, and we decided to part with those. I'm pretty sure we'll find some other areas of savings as well, where just initially working with CyCognito, they're able to find, oh, we have some domains, we have some other various assorted things that we don't really need, and by parting with them, we can kind of save some time and money on. But again, like with the easier integration of acquired organizations, this is kind of a long-term strategic play here. Just in the future, who knows what other things they're going to find, what other kind of conclusions they'll be able to come to about what assets they need and don't need, thanks to all of the new information that they're getting from CyCognito. So this brings us back to our final results. The composite organization realizes a 490% ROI with a $13.2 million net present value. And across all 4 interviewees, the CyCognito platform was able to make significant progress in handling the frequency of false positives, required manual labor, and low visibility. And we just have this one last quote included that really kind of gets at that from the Director of Security and Compliance for the Physical Security Organization. Before the CyCognito platform, we had to rely on what the network team was telling us. And that was pretty much it. When we did an acquisition, the network team would let us know, okay, here's a new IP range for this company that we just acquired. Our discovery was limited to what they told me we had. That was one of the reasons that we went with CyCognito. Now I have full visibility of all the assets that we own. So that just really gets at both the visibility gains and as well some of the manual effort and manual labor gains that you have as well, because that network team is now able to work with CyCognito and get more information much, much faster than they otherwise were able to. So that concludes our overview of the TI, which I again encourage everyone here to read. And I think I'll pass it back to Ryan.
Great. Thank you, Sam. And thank you, Sam and Jess, for this excellent presentation. It looks like we do have some questions from the audience, so I'll get into those now. The first question is, did CyCognito's customers explain their methodology for understanding their external attack surface before working with CyCognito as a partner? And specifically, how was EASM discovery for them different since the partnership?
That is a great question. Before working with CyCognito, like I said, a lot of the organizations basically either did not have an attack surface management solution, or they had one that was relying on kind of, I don't want to say like bad discovery, but like much less complete discovery and information. And a lot of the times, if they really wanted to get a good look at what their environment consisted of, they would have to really dive in and have people just digging around, and that would take a lot of time. But with CyCognito, there's machine learning, natural language processing, and graph data modeling that reveals and relates business relationships. So after working with CyCognito, they're able to take advantage of that technology to discover all the assets of entities exposed to the internet and find connections between them. So it really is kind of a sea change in terms of discovery of, you just have this wealth of data without doing a lot of work for it, just available to you.
Excellent. Yeah, automation is key. So the next question is, how does CyCognito automate the discovery of new assets? Does this approach provide false positives?
So basically, CyCognito uses all of the kind of automation and other stuff to find new assets that I already went over a little bit, but in terms of false positives, what we found is that it doesn't, because of CyCognito's really, really valuable prioritization. So it'll prioritize hundreds or thousands of critical attack vectors and kind of winnow that down to the ones that account for the most risk. They do this automatically based on how easy they were to find, how hard the problems can be to remediate, how complicated, and they assign a security grade to track improvement.
Yeah, one additional point I'll add to that is it's all based on root domain. So it's essentially a no code approach to doing the discovery. Doesn't require being hooked into the code base to do that discovery. Feature of the product. The next question is, does CyCognito classify assets into groups to provide more context for security teams, such as web apps, S3 buckets, etc.?
Yes, they absolutely do. Basically, that's kind of the heart of the prioritization and the contextualization that was so valuable to folks, is you'll get just like a nice, easy letter grade based on how easy the asset is to find, how hard a potential problem is to remediate. And it just lets people start working on the worst things and go from there in a way that's very, very helpful.
Excellent. The next question is, what is the process CyCognito uses to expedite the mean time to remediation for high-risk threats?
So as we discussed, like our findings in the case study were that there is a lot of indirect help that goes into this, easier interface, easier integrations. But in terms of direct help, CyCognito, basically, they give you kind of step-by-step instructions on how to fix it. They give you detailed and actionable remediation guidance and intelligence for your team, and provide kind of a clear path forward of, okay, here's a problem. You need to do this, this, and this in order to, fix it. And that's also where the integration really comes into play, because you can integrate those steps with your pre-existing workflow, and you don't have to kind of just start a new thing or try to kludge things together in a way that's not very conducive. So a lot of useful kind of instructions combined with just ease of use in general.
Awesome. Thank you. The next question is, how do CyCognito's customers find which assets are most vulnerable to attacks like Log4j?
So what a lot of the customers did is they just gave CyCognito kind of their names of their business, and CyCognito went out and discovered all of their assets. And that prioritization that we talked about, that like filtration, then goes and flags, hey, this asset is really vulnerable. Here are the steps you need in order to fix it. Except obviously it's not one asset by one asset. You'll get a list of like a couple hundred assets that are at risk and you need to do something with.
Cool, thank you. And the last question we have so far is, which data was most compelling for cybersecurity insurers to convince them to reduce premium for CyCognito customers?
I think that all goes down to the discovery and the contextualization, where basically the ability to go to a cybersecurity insurer that is presumably operating from more like publicly available data through other services and go, here's all of the data that we have. It's a lot more thorough than yours. It's a lot more accurate than yours. We know about everything that you're talking about and about a bunch of things you didn't even know about that we know about. And we know what all of these things are, and we have instructions on how to fix it. So we've already fixed a bunch of problems. We're working on fixing more problems. Just that kind of like, no, we're like 2 steps ahead of you on knowing what the risks are and how to deal with them. That I think is what was most compelling to cybersecurity insurers.
Awesome, cool. Well, that concludes all the questions that we have so far. So with that being said, I want to thank Sam and Jess once again for your time today and for this excellent deep dive presentation on the ESM market, and then just some feedback you found after doing some research on CyCognito's customers. And thank you everybody in the audience for attending as well. And if anyone is perhaps interested in getting a personalized walkthrough of the CyCognito platform, so to see how CyCognito can help your team discover its entire external attack surface, prioritize which risks are most mission critical, and fix the highest impact vulnerabilities as quickly as possible, just go to cycognito.com/demo and you can schedule a convenient time to do so. So with that being said, thank you everybody again for your time, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your week. Cheers. Take care.